The council chamber hummed with the sound of dying hope. 47 species sat in a vast circle, their forms ranging from crystalline structures to gaseous entities held in magnetic fields. The Valorian delegation occupied the central platform, their insectoid frames rigid with fear. Behind them, the star charts showed what everyone already knew. The Keth swarm had consumed 17 systems in the last rotation. In 3 months, it would reach the core worlds. Council leader Thesser, a Valorian whose carapace had darkened with age, stood before the assembled masses. His mandibles clicked against each other in what passed for deep breathing among his kind. "We have tried everything," he said. His voice carried no emotion. Emotion had been burned out of the Valorians weeks ago when the first fleet died. "Our weapons do not slow them. Our fleets die. Our colonies fall." "Then we run," said the mercantile voice, a creature of pure math and data, existing only as code within the chamber's systems. "We abandon the outer systems and consolidate at the core." "Millions would die," said something that looked like a floating garden, its petals trembling. "Millions will die anyway," the mercantile voice replied. Logic had no patience for sentiment. Thesser raised one of his lower limbs. The gesture meant silence, and the chamber obeyed. "There is one option left," he said. "It was proposed 50 years ago. No one took it seriously then." The silence deepened. Several species leaned forward. Others retracted entirely into their protective casings. "The Deathworld Registry," Thesser continued. "Centuries ago, the old explorers cataloged worlds too dangerous for normal habitation, worlds where life was violent, where survival itself was the only law. The registry contains 43 such planets." "We cannot recruit from Deathworlds," said a crystalline being, its voice like glass breaking in slow motion. "Those species are feral, unpredictable. They kill their own kind for resources." "They are also," Thesser said quietly, "nearly impossible to kill." The chamber fell silent again. The weight of desperation was a physical thing now, pressing down on all of them. "There is one Deathworld that we know more about than the others," Thesser said. "A planet called Earth. The humans who live there have been cataloged as having a survival rating of 9.8 out of 10. That is the highest rating in the entire registry." "Humans?" The mercantile voice seemed skeptical, though skepticism sounded like a minor glitch in its vocal processors. "The bipedal carbon-based species. They are still in early spaceflight. They have weapons that are millennia behind our own." "Their weapons are not the point," Thesser said. "What matters is that they do not stop. They do not surrender. They do not know how to fail. That is what the registry says. That is what I am asking you to remember." A Valorian aide approached the council leader and handed him a communication device. Thesser held it up so all could see. "I am sending a blind request through the registry protocols. We are asking for help. We are not demanding. We are not ordering. We are asking. If Earth's humans choose to respond, they will do so as contractors, not conscripts. They will have their own terms." "This is insane," the crystalline being said. "We are asking barbarians to save us." "No," Thesser replied. "We are asking survivors to teach us how to survive." He activated the device. The message went out into the dark spaces between stars, encrypted in a language that only the registry archives could decode. It was short. It said only what needed to be said. A request for salvation went out, species endangered, immediate threat, willing to negotiate terms, seeking contractors, interested parties, please respond. In the council chamber they waited. Hours passed, days. No response came. Some of the delegates began to hope that Earth would ignore the call. They could maintain their dignity. They could call this a failed experiment and proceed with evacuation protocols. Then a message came back. It was faster than should have been possible. The response time alone suggested that Earth had been monitoring the registry channels, waiting. The message was also short. Earth responds, "We are interested. Sending delegation in 12 days. Bring detailed maps of the threat. Bring casualty projections. Bring resource inventories. We will need to know everything about your problem before we can tell you what we cost." The chamber erupted. Some species celebrated. Some protested. The crystalline being demanded that the message be rejected immediately. Thesser just stood there, watching the star charts. The swarm continued its advance. It did not care what the council decided. The universe did not care. Survival did not care. Only the humans, somewhere on a distant death world, had stopped caring about most things and focused entirely on this single moment. 3 days later, the first human ships appeared at the edge of Valorian space. They were not impressive by the standards of the Galactic Council. The ships were blocky, functional, covered in exposed panels and equipment that served no aesthetic purpose. They looked like what they were, tools, built to work, not to impress. But they came in formation. They came with precise navigation. They came with the kind of efficiency that suggested they had already thought through every problem and every solution. The human delegation consisted of 15 members, all bipedal, all wearing simple uniforms of dark gray. They moved through the council chamber with the kind of confidence that came not from arrogance but from absolute certainty about what they were. The lead human was a tall male named Marcus Voss. His face was lined, scarred, unremarkable by any standard. He did not bow to the council. He did not show deference. He simply sat in the chair that had been prepared for him and waited. Thesser approached him. "Thank you for coming," the Valorian said. "We came because we chose to," Voss replied. "Let's be clear about that from the beginning. Nothing about what happens next is gratitude. It's business. We assess your situation, we determine if the risk is acceptable, and we tell you what we cost. You can pay that cost or you can't. Either way, the conversation ends." Several council members gasped. In 1,000 years of diplomatic protocol, no one had ever spoken to the Valorian Council with such bluntness. Thesser, however, felt something shift inside him, something small, something like hope. "Show us your star charts," Voss said. "Tell us everything about the Keth swarm, hold nothing back, and tell us the truth. I need to know if you've been lying to yourselves about how bad this actually is." The council members looked at each other. This human spoke as though he understood desperation, as though he had been through something so difficult that the swarm was just another problem, just another threat to be managed. Thesser had never been so grateful to see a Deathworlder in his life. As the briefings began, as the humans took notes in their strange shorthand and asked questions that cut straight to the heart of every problem, the council leader realized something fundamental. The humans had not come here to save the Valorian collective. They had come here because they understood something that 47 civilizations had forgotten. They understood that survival was not something you could buy or fight your way to. Survival was something you built, step by step, choice by choice, understanding by understanding. And humans, it seemed, knew how to build. The colony world of Valdris Prime was dying. Voss stood at the observation window of the human command center and watched the Keth swarm destroy another section of the lower atmosphere. The locust-like creatures moved in perfect synchronization, each one the size of a transport ship, consuming everything, metal, flesh, atmosphere itself. Where they passed, nothing remained, not even wreckage, just void. Behind him, his team worked in complete silence. No one spoke unless necessary. No one moved without purpose. The humans had set up their center in a mountain bunker deep beneath the planet's surface, far from the Valorian command post. Command Post 1, they called it. The Valorians had wanted human integration. Voss had refused. "We work our way," he had told Thesser. "You work your way. When we need to coordinate, we coordinate, but we do not work in committees." The Valorian Council had protested. Voss had simply repeated himself 3 times, By the fourth time, they had stopped arguing. Now, 5 days into the human intervention, the results were beginning to show. Not in any way that looked impressive. Not in any way that the Valorians appreciated. The first thing Voss had done was tell the Valorian military commander to stand down, to stop attacking the swarm directly, to pull every defensive fleet back to core positions. "You will be slaughtered if you engage," Voss had said simply. "We will be slaughtered if we do nothing," the commander had replied. "No," Voss said. "If you do nothing, the swarm will kill you. If you engage the swarm, you will die faster and achieve nothing. The difference matters more than you think." The military commander had ignored him. The Valorian fleet had engaged the Keth swarm. In 72 hours, nothing remained of that fleet but radiation shadows and the knowledge of absolute defeat. Now the Valorian military commander was gone, replaced by someone younger and more willing to listen, more willing to understand that courage and tactical sense were not the same thing. What Voss had set up instead was infrastructure. The humans had come with resources they had not advertised, ships designed not for combat but for logistics, transportation vessels, medical units, water processors, food synthesis systems, communication arrays, the kind of equipment that did not win wars but made survival possible when wars were lost. The humans had dispersed these across 3 continents. They had created evacuation corridors. They had set up underground shelters in places the swarm could not reach. They had built redundancy into every single system. When one shelter fell, the people inside had already been moved to another. When one supply line was cut, 6 others activated to replace it. "Your military calls this cowardice," a voice said behind Voss. He turned to see a Valorian observer, an aide to the council named Asserting. The Valorian had been assigned to watch the humans, to ensure they were not stealing resources or sabotaging the Valorian military. After 5 days, Asserting was beginning to understand that he was watching something very different. "They are frustrated because they understand war," Voss said. "Not survival, war. Those are not the same thing." "You are losing cities," Asserting said. "The swarm advances every day." "We are losing structures," Voss replied. "We are not losing the people inside them. The people are what matters. The cities can be rebuilt. The people cannot." "That is defeatist thinking." Voss turned to face the Valorian fully. "No, it is survival thinking. Your species learned to count victory in the number of enemies killed. Mine learned to count it in the number of our people alive when the threat ends. You measure survival by what you keep. We measure it by what we save." Asserting had no response. Over the next week, the difference between these 2 philosophies would become impossible to ignore. The Keth swarm advanced. In 6 days, they consumed 40% of Valdris Prime's habitable surface. By any traditional measure, this was catastrophic. The Valorian military leadership called emergency sessions. They demanded that Voss authorize a counteroffensive. They insisted that they had the firepower to punch through the swarm's advance line. Voss sat in meeting after meeting and said the same thing. "No. You are not the commander here," the Valorian general said finally, his mandibles clicking with rage. "We are paying you to serve, not to obstruct." "You are paying us to keep your people alive," Voss corrected. "Not to waste them on a gesture. Your firepower cannot punch through the swarm. I have run the calculations. You will lose 90% of your forces and slow the swarm by exactly 8 hours. I will not authorize it." "You have no authority to authorize anything." "Then tell me to leave," Voss said. "Tell the Valorian Council that you want the humans gone. Tell them that you reject the human logistics network. Tell them that you are willing to lose the evacuation corridors, the food synthesis, the medical centers, the water processors, and the transport ships. Tell them, and we will leave tomorrow." The general did not tell the council anything. The Valorian offensive never launched. Instead, more people were moved to safe zones, more shelters were constructed, more supply lines were activated. 10 days into the human intervention, something remarkable happened. The casualty rate stopped climbing. For the first time since the swarm arrived, the number of Valorians alive stopped decreasing. In the human command center, Voss reviewed the numbers. 7 million saved so far, another 5 million in the evacuation pipeline. Losses had been terrible, but losses had stopped being absolute disaster. They had become manageable. A junior officer named Kellys approached him. "Sir, the Council is requesting a status report. They want to know when we will begin military operations against the swarm." "Tell them we already have," Voss said. "But we have not fired a single shot." "Exactly," Voss replied. "We are winning a war, not a battle. The shots do not matter. The survival does." Kellys left to deliver the message. Voss returned to the observation window. Below, more transport ships were loading civilians. In the distance, the swarm consumed another city. The machines that had seemed so unstoppable were now advancing into territory that was already empty. They were destroying structures. They were not finding people to kill. For the first time, Voss allowed himself something close to satisfaction. The Valorian military commander appeared at the command center an hour later. He did not look angry. He looked exhausted. He looked like someone who had just understood something terrible and necessary at the same time. "How many more can you save?" the commander asked. "Depends on what you are willing to give us," Voss said. "Anything, we will give you anything." Voss nodded slowly. He had been waiting for this moment since the beginning. The moment when desperation became real enough that the Valorians would understand what he was offering them was not salvation. It was something much more valuable. It was control. "Then tell the Council we need to talk about logistics," Voss said. "All of it. Supply chains, military resources, food distribution, ammunition production, everything. We need authority over every supply system in the collective. Absolute authority. No votes, no committees, just us deciding what goes where and to whom." "They will never agree," the commander said. "They will," Voss replied with absolute certainty. "Because the only alternative is to watch everyone die. And in a few more weeks, when they understand that we have already saved more lives than anyone thought possible, they will agree to much worse than that." The commander left to deliver the message. Voss returned to watching the swarm consume an empty city. Behind him, the humans continued their work, building, planning, calculating, doing the impossible by refusing to accept that impossible things could not be done. The war for survival had just begun, and Earth's Deathworlders had already won the first and most important battle. They had made themselves essential. 3 months into the human intervention, the Valorian collective discovered that they had made a deal they did not fully understand until it was far too late to undo it. Voss sat in the council chambers and listened to them argue. The chamber had changed. Now, instead of 47 species sitting in a perfect circle, there were 46. The 47th seat belonged to Earth. Voss occupied it without apology or explanation. "The humans are overstepping their authority," the mercantile voice said. Its processors buzzed with calculated fury. "They have taken control of supply distribution. They have authority over ammunition allocation. This was supposed to be temporary." "It is temporary," Voss said simply. "It will end when the swarm is destroyed and you are no longer dependent on human logistics." "And when will that be?" demanded the crystalline being. "When I say it will be," Voss replied. The chamber exploded. Species shouted and protested and made demands. Voss did not look up from the tablet in front of him. He continued reviewing supply reports. He continued working as though the noise did not exist. Thesser, the Valorian council leader, watched this exchange carefully. He had begun to understand something that his fellow delegates were still learning. The humans had not seized power. The Valorian collective had surrendered it willingly, piece by piece, in exchange for survival. Now that the collective wanted their power back, they were discovering that you cannot negotiate with someone who holds the only thing you need. "There is a proposal," Voss said, speaking over the chaos. He did not raise his voice. He simply waited for silence. It came quickly. 3 days ago, the Keth swarm consumed the colony on Helix 7. We calculated that we could save 80,000 civilians if we reroute transport from the central supply hub. "Do it immediately," Thesser said. "The reroute would reduce ammunition shipments to Fleet Position 12 by 40%, Voss continued. "That fleet has been pushing into swarm territory, attempting to reclaim lost systems." The military commander of Fleet Position 12 stood up. "Reduce that ammunition, and we will be slaughtered. We are already operating at minimum tactical efficiency." "Yes," Voss said, "you will be slaughtered, or you can retreat to a defensible position and live to fight another day. The ammunition is going to save 80,000 lives. That is more important than Fleet Position 12. "You cannot make that decision," the military commander said. "You have no authority over military operations." "I have control of the ammunition supply," Voss replied, "which is the same thing more or less." The military commander looked at Thesser. Thesser looked at the council. No one spoke. In that silence the truth became obvious. They all depended on the humans for food, for water, for medicine, for ammunition, for transport, for every single system that kept the Valorian collective alive. Voss had built them into the infrastructure so completely that removing them would cause immediate collapse. "Reroute the supplies," Thesser said finally. The military commander sat down. Fleet Position 12 would have to retreat. 80,000 civilians would be saved. The calculus was terrible, but it was undeniable. The humans controlled the most important resource in any war, not weapons, survival. Over the next weeks, the pattern repeated across the collective. The humans rerouted supplies. They made decisions about who would receive food and who would not. They determined which planets would be evacuated and which would be abandoned. They controlled the flow of every resource that kept the Valorian collective and its allied species alive. And every time the council objected, Voss simply reminded them that he could stop the shipments entirely. It was a gentle reminder. He never made threats. He simply stated facts. The facts were that without human logistics, the collective would collapse within 30 days. The facts were that the Keth swarm would consume the core worlds within 60 days. The facts were that the only thing standing between extinction and survival was Earth's willingness to continue working. Negotiations began. They lasted 3 weeks. They took place in private chambers away from the public council. Earth's demands were simple: representation on all military and civilian councils, veto power over decisions that affected survival of the collective, long-term trade agreements, technology sharing, access to the collective's research archives. The council protested each demand, but they always ended up agreeing. Because the alternative was death. 6 months into the intervention, something shifted in the war against the Keth swarm. The human logistics network had become so efficient, so complete, that something unexpected happened. Casualty rates did not just stabilize, they began to decline. Not because the humans were killing the swarm. They were not. The Valorian military was still losing battles, but they were no longer losing people. The evacuations happened so quickly, so completely, that the swarm was consuming empty cities and abandoned facilities. More importantly, the humans had begun something that the Valorian military had never considered. They had begun studying the swarm, not from a combat perspective, from an infrastructure perspective. They mapped the swarm's eating patterns. They predicted where it would go and moved people out of the way in advance. They created false targets, automated facilities designed to attract the swarm away from populated areas. The swarm was still advancing, but it was advancing into a universe that had no people left for it to kill. And then came the day that changed everything. A proposal reached the council. It came from Marcus Voss. It recommended a military operation that would cause significant civilian casualties to slow the swarm's advance by an estimated 30%. The operation would be devastating. Millions would die. The council voted to approve it. Voss abstained. "You must vote," Thesser said. "You have that authority." "I do," Voss replied, "and I choose not to use it." "Why?" "Because it is the wrong choice," Voss said simply, "and I am not going to help you make it." "Then what will you do?" Voss stood and walked out of the council chamber. Behind him, he left only a message to his logistics officers: redirect all supply shipments away from the planets targeted for the operation. Begin evacuation of civilian populations immediately. The council tried to override the order. They tried to force the human logistics network to comply with the approved operation, but they could not. The humans did not acknowledge the override. The supply ships did not stop. The evacuations did not halt. The approved operation could not proceed without the supplies that the humans controlled. The vote was reversed within hours. In that moment, the council finally understood the complete scope of what had happened to them. They had not hired contractors. They had surrendered their autonomy to a species that controlled every system they depended on. They had made themselves a client state of Earth without ever using those words, without ever admitting it. Thesser called Voss to a private meeting. "What do you want?" the Valorian council leader asked. "What I already have," Voss replied. "Authority over logistics, representation on the councils, your agreement to accept human guidance on critical decisions. Everything I am already taking, I am now going to ask you to give willingly. And if we refuse?" "Then I remove the supply ships," Voss said. "The decision, of course, is entirely yours." Thesser looked at this human, this creature from a death world that had come to the council not to fight, but to build, not to conquer, but to make itself essential, not to rule, but to position itself so perfectly inside the structure of survival that ruling became unnecessary. "You have already won," Thesser said. "I know," Voss replied. "The question now is whether you are going to fight about it or whether we are going to get to work." Thesser thought about the millions who were still alive because of human logistics. Millions who would be dead if the swarm had been given anyone except the Deathworlders to kill. "We will get to work," he said. Voss nodded and left. Behind him, he left an empire that did not yet understand that it was no longer an empire. It was a collection of species that had, through desperation and fear, traded their independence for the only thing that mattered: survival. The negotiation chamber was silent. Voss sat at the head of the table, flanked by his officers. Across from him, the representatives of the Valorian Collective and 45 allied species waited. They were waiting for him to speak. He let them wait. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The representatives became visibly uncomfortable. This was not how council chambers were supposed to function. There were protocols. There were traditions. There was supposed to be courteous speech and diplomatic language. Voss ignored all of it. Finally, Thesser spoke. "What are your terms?" "Simple," Voss said. "Earth's permanent representation on the collective council. Veto power over existential decisions. 30% of all new technology developed by the collective going forward. Mining rights to 5 mineral-rich systems. Military coordination authority during crises. An acknowledgement that human leadership has final authority in all matters related to survival and logistics." The chamber erupted immediately. Species shouted. Representatives slammed their limbs and appendages on the table. The crystalline being made sounds that resembled screaming feedback. The mercantile voice calculated rapidly, then announced that such terms were economically impossible. "They are, however, possible," Voss said calmly, because you have no alternative. We can remove the human contingent, the military commander said. We can take over the logistics operations ourselves. You could try, Voss replied. You would fail. Your people would not cooperate. Your systems are not designed to function without human maintenance. You would lose 70% of your logistics capability immediately. You would lose access to Earth's research. You would lose military coordination with the only species that understands how to win a war against the swarm. You have exactly 30 days of supplies without us. Then your population starts dying. This is extortion, the crystalline being said. This is mathematics, Voss corrected. You depend on us more than you depend on food or water or air. Therefore, what I ask is what you will pay. Whether you call it extortion or negotiation is immaterial. Thesser raised his limbs. The chamber silenced immediately. Give us 1 hour, the council leader said. We need to deliberate. You have 30 minutes, Voss said. After that, we assume the answer is no and we begin the transition to human autonomous operations. That means no more consultation, no more council votes, just human decisions. 30 minutes later, they returned with an agreement. Not a perfect agreement, not an agreement that made them happy, but an agreement that they could live with, because living with it was better than the alternative. Earth had a permanent seat on the Valorian Council. Earth had veto power. Earth had mining rights. Earth had technology access and military coordination authority. The collective had basically surrendered, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The representative of the gaseous species spoke up. The terms are unconscionable, but if we refuse, we die, so we agree. Thank you, Voss said. Do not thank us, the gaseous entity replied. You have not saved us. You have enslaved us to the possibility of survival. Voss stood and looked at this creature that had, through its transparency of language, actually understood what had happened. That is accurate, he said. You were free and dying. Now you are not free, but you will live. That is the trade. That is always the trade for species that face extinction. Freedom for survival. I did not invent this trade. I simply positioned myself to be the one who could force it. He walked toward the door. As he reached it, he paused. Work begins tomorrow morning, he said. New logistics networks will be implemented across all collective systems. All supply chains will now route through human checkpoints. All military operations will require human approval. All population movements will be coordinated by human authorities. You said we would have joint authority, Thesser said carefully. You will, Voss replied. Joint means that we agree. If we disagree, human authority prevails. That was implicit in the veto power. I am simply clarifying it now. He left before anyone could respond. In the human quarters that night, his second-in-command, a woman named Sarah, approached him with coffee. Old Earth coffee, synthesized to taste like something real, even though it was not. We are going to have a rebellion, she said. Probably, Voss agreed. Some military units will refuse the new coordination protocols. Yes. We will have to enforce this by cutting off their supplies. I know, Voss said. Sarah sat down across from him. They had known each other for 15 years. She had been with him on 3 different worlds. She had seen him use the same tactics to integrate Earth technology into the Valorian military, to position human officers in critical command positions, to make humans essential to every system they touched. Is this what we came here to do? She asked. No, Voss said. We came here to survive, but survival requires leverage. Leverage requires making yourself essential. Making yourself essential requires being willing to be the thing people fear and depend on simultaneously. That is not survival, Sarah said. That is conquest. They are the same thing, Voss replied. The swarm conquers through killing. We conquer through being necessary. The end result is the same: territory, resources, authority. We just get it without the bloodshed. Most of it without bloodshed, Sarah corrected. There will be those who resist. There always are, Voss said. He looked at his coffee, at the moon visible through the window, at the distant light of the Keth swarm consuming yet another section of space. And they will die or they will accept. Both are acceptable outcomes. Sarah left him alone. Voss finished his coffee and thought about what it meant to be a savior. The Valorian collective wanted to believe that was what humans were. Saviors, heroes, noble creatures who had come to help out of altruism and good faith. That was a nice story. It was not the true story. The true story was that Earth's leadership had seen an opportunity. They had seen a collective desperate enough to accept any terms. They had seen a structure of control that could be built through logistics instead of weapons. They had seen leverage and power within reach. And they had taken it. Just as any species would. Just as the Valorians would have done if they had been strong enough and desperate enough and willing to be ruthless about the mathematics of power. The rebellion came 3 weeks later, exactly as Sarah had predicted. A faction of the Valorian military refused to accept human coordination authority. They attempted to implement their own logistics network independent of human control. Voss's response was absolute. He cut off their supplies, all of them: food, water, ammunition, medicine, transport, everything. Within 5 days they surrendered. Within 10 days they were integrated into the human command structure, and the rebellion had simply become another example of what happened when you did not cooperate. The rest of the collective watched and understood. Rebellion was not possible, not because they lacked the weapons, but because they lacked the will to die for independence when the humans controlled every resource that kept them alive. And so the Valorian collective, and the 45 allied species that depended on it, became clients of Earth, not in name, but in every practical way that mattered. They made decisions in consultation with humans. They accepted that human interests took priority in conflicts with other species. They agreed to technology sharing that allowed Earth to reverse engineer their most advanced weapons systems. In exchange, they lived. And as long as the Keth swarm still existed, they would need the humans, which meant Earth would hold power over them indefinitely, even after the swarm was destroyed, even after the crisis ended. Because by then, dependence would be complete, and humans, as the swarm would eventually learn, were very patient about collecting on debts. Voss stood in the command center and watched the logistics reports flow across his screens. Billions of people, hundreds of systems, trillions of resources, all flowing through the checkpoints that humans controlled. This was not salvation. This was victory. 2 years later, the final Keth swarm colony was destroyed. The destruction did not come from a massive military assault. It came from the human strategy that had been built from the very first day. The humans had always known how the swarm would be defeated. They had simply waited for the Valorian collective to become dependent enough that humans could choose the method without interference. The method was simple, systematic, patient. The humans had positioned research stations inside the swarm's expansion zone. They had allowed these stations to be consumed. Inside the stations were genetic markers. Inside the genetic markers was something engineered to activate inside the swarm's own biology. When enough swarm units had the markers, the humans triggered the activation. The swarm's reproduction system collapsed. They began to cannibalize each other. Within months, the entire hive began to fail. The Valorian military wanted to claim credit. They wanted celebrations and statues, and the knowledge that they had fought to defend their worlds. But they all knew the truth. The humans had won this war before it even began. They had won it by understanding that the swarm was not something you defeated with weapons. It was something you defeated by being more patient than it was, by planning further into the future, by accepting casualties and continuing to function, by making yourself essential and then making sure that nothing could function without you. It was a Deathworld way of fighting, and the swarm, which had conquered 47 civilizations, had never encountered it before. On the day the final swarm unit died, Voss stood in the human command center and watched the celebration begin. Across 17 systems, the Valorian people danced in their streets. They made speeches about courage and sacrifice. They mourned their dead. They celebrated their survival. None of them mentioned the humans. Sarah approached Voss with a tablet. It contained requests, dozens of them, species asking if humans would withdraw now that the crisis was over, species asking if humans would accept reduced authority in exchange for continued logistics support, species asking if humans would agree to less favorable trade terms now that the swarm was defeated. "What do you want to tell them?" Sarah asked. Voss reviewed the requests one by one. Then he handed the tablet back to Sarah without responding. "Tell them no," he said finally. "Tell them that the swarm is gone, but the necessity does not change. They still need food from human agriculture. They still need medicine from human research. They still need transport from human ships. They still need technology from human engineers. The only thing that has changed is that they are now beginning to realize the true cost of their dependence." "Some of them will try to leave the collective," Sarah said. "Some will try to develop their own logistics infrastructure." "Let them," Voss replied. "They will fail, and when they fail they will come back, and each time they fail we will ask for more favorable terms." Sarah smiled slightly. She understood what Voss had understood from the beginning. Desperation was not temporary. Desperation was a permanent state for species that had faced extinction. Once a species knew what death looked like, they would do anything to avoid it, even surrender their freedom, even accept permanent subjugation, even celebrate it as salvation. A young Valorian officer named Kelly's approached. Kelly's had been with Voss since the beginning of the intervention. The officer had transitioned almost completely to human military doctrine. The officer was one of the first of many who would. "Sir," Kelly said, "the Council is requesting your presence for the official victory ceremony." "Tell them I am busy," Voss said. "But sir, they are expecting you. You are the primary architect of the victory." "Exactly," Voss replied, "which is why I will not be there. If I attend, I become the savior they want to thank and reward. If I do not attend, I remain the necessary thing they depend on. The second is more valuable than the first." Kelly's looked confused, but nodded and left to deliver the message. In the hours that followed, Voss received multiple requests from the Council. All declined, all without explanation. By the time evening arrived, Voss had become the most important human in the Valorian collective because he was the only one not celebrating. He was still working, still calculating, still doing the mathematics of survival and leverage. That night he attended a dinner with Thesser, the Valorian council leader. The dinner took place in a private chamber, away from other species. Just two beings who had fought a war together and had come out on very different sides. "You did not attend the ceremony," Thesser said. "I had work," Voss replied. Everyone else attended, even the species that were not directly involved in the crisis. "They are learning," Voss said. "They are learning that being associated with humans is important. They are learning that our approval matters. They are learning that the hierarchy has changed." Thesser looked at this human across the table. When the humans had first arrived, Thesser had thought they were desperate creatures trying to prove their worth to the collective. Now, 2 years later, Thesser understood that the desperation had always been on the other side. The Valorians had been the desperate ones. The humans had simply been patient enough to wait for the realization to set in. "You have conquered us," Thesser said quietly. "No," Voss replied. "You have conquered yourselves by becoming dependent. I simply positioned myself where you would fall." "Is there any difference?" "For you, no," Voss said. "For history, possibly. You can tell yourself that you surrendered. or you can tell yourself that you were conquered. Either way, you will still wake up tomorrow knowing that your people are alive because humans decided they should be. That is the only truth that matters. They finished dinner in silence. When Voss left, Thesser remained sitting at the table for a long time. The Valorian council leader had lived through countless crises. He had made decisions that cost millions of lives, but he had never faced a decision quite like this one. The humans had saved them, and in the process, they had made sure that the Valorians would never be free of the debt. 3 weeks later, Voss received word that Earth was sending new ships, hundreds of them. They would arrive with supplies and equipment for 12 new colonies across collective space. The colonies would be staffed by human personnel. The colonies would operate under human authority. The colonies would effectively be extensions of Earth inside the collective's territory. The council wanted to protest, but they could not. The new colonies brought benefits, new food sources, new research capabilities, new infrastructure that made survival easier and more stable. And every new colony tied the collective more tightly to Earth. Voss reviewed the colony projections. Within 5 years, there would be 50 human colonies inside collective space. Within 10 years, there would be 500. The Valorian collective would slowly become a federation of human-dominated colonies loosely connected by species that had surrendered their independence decades earlier. It was not conquest in the traditional sense. No armies, no forced surrender, no defeated enemy signing terms. Just the quiet, patient integration of a Deathworld species into a galactic structure that no longer had the ability to say no. Voss stood at the observation window of the command center. 3 new supply ships had just arrived, carrying the first shipment of colonists for the new settlements. The colonists were mostly human, but they included volunteers from other species. Species that had begun to understand that integration with humans was the best available option. Sarah appeared next to him. "The Council is asking about military command restructuring," she said. "They want to propose a committee system for approving human military actions." "Tell them no," Voss said. "Tell them that military actions are approved by human command authority. They can observe if they like. They cannot vote. They will protest." "They will," Voss agreed, "and then they will accept because they always do." They stood together watching the supply ships be unloaded, watching the machinery of human logistics continue its quiet expansion, watching the Valorian collective gradually dissolve from an independent civilization into a collection of species bound together by their need for human resources. "Do you think we have won?" Sarah asked. Voss considered the question. The swarm was defeated. Humanity had permanent authority in the collective. Humans controlled all logistics. Humans had veto power over existential decisions. Humans had mining rights and technology access and military coordination authority. By any reasonable measure, Earth had won completely. "No," Voss said finally, "we have not won, we have just begun." "What do you mean?" "The swarm was a threat," Voss said. "That made the Valorians willing to negotiate. That made them willing to accept our terms. But the swarm is dead now, and desperation, if it becomes too comfortable, can start to fade." "So you want to create a new desperation," Voss said. "A slower one, a quieter one that operates at the level of daily survival rather than extinction crisis. As long as they need us for food, water, medicine, transport, and technology, they will accept our authority. And we will make sure they always need us. We will make sure that becoming independent from humans is so difficult, so expensive, so impractical, that no species will even try." Sarah understood then. The war was not over. The real conquest had just begun. It would take decades. It would be patient. It would be built on infrastructure and logistics and the quiet mathematics of power. But it would be complete. Voss looked out at the Valorian collective and saw what it would become. A galactic federation bound not by choice, but by need, bound not by conquest, but by the delicate architecture of dependencies that humans had built around them, bound by the knowledge that resistance was impossible because humans controlled every single system that kept them alive. The Keth swarm had tried to conquer through strength. It had failed. Humans had learned a different way. They conquered through making themselves essential. And they would never let anyone forget it.